Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the award-winning recovery podcast, Get in the Herd. My name is Nathan Mitchell, and I am your host today. Our guest today is Katie Sponsler, and I've had the privilege of speaking to Katie one-on-one in a moment of a bit of franticism that was in my it was going at the moment, and so that's there, and also I've had the privilege of listening to Katie address the entire candlelight vigil we hosted last week. So it is a privilege to have Katie Sponsler. She is a delegate candidate in the 66th district. Is that correct? Can you hear me, Katie? Oh no.
Yeah, no, you're good. I took off my headpiece because you blanked out on me again for a little bit. So,
Oh no.
so we're gonna do our best to do without it.
All right. Well, you know what? Flexibility and a sense of humor gets me through a lot.
Yeah, it's a really important part of anything.
Well, welcome to the show. I know that you are a candidate for delegate it's the 66th, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, 66th district. And I know that you have a history of service. And when you spoke about challenges that you faced and family faced last week, it really resonated with me and a lot of our listeners, our participants at the event last week. So welcome to the show. Tell us, Katie, why are you running for delegate?
Well, largely because this is just a district that represents a lot of folks that have been left behind. It's a working class district for the most part. It's an ex-urban district. So, we hear a lot of talk about suburban, urban and rural politics, but communities that are built around main streets that have kind of lost population and become less and less viable in the last couple decades are not ones that we talk about. And so I want to make sure that folks like me that have faced barriers in life, that have come from working class backgrounds, that are constantly struggling, that we actually have representation. And we don't get it very often because folks like me and that face those barriers have difficulty running. We don't have the money, the resources, the energy, the time. And so right now I'm able to. So I feel like that's a really important voice that we need in the legislature. And I hope that I can actually represent it well and hear from the folks here, whether it's the things that are similar to my challenges or new challenges, and make sure that they actually have a voice in the legislature.
Excellent. And, reading up on your bio, a couple of things that resonate with me is your service in the military, and thank you for your service. And I really do want to talk a lot about this because I think it's really fun. Your time as a park ranger, because there's a tiny little Nathan somewhere somewhere in the multiverse. There's a Nathan who's a park ranger and just living his best life in the woods, just taking care of the bears and I don't know what. But and I know that you're also a mother of a 6-year-old. Is that correct?
A 6-year-old and a 22-year-old. Actually,
okay. So you've got a range there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I know that's that you've got a history of service, and so when I think about the service and I think about what recovery means, there's a crossover, and they talk about, if you go into the rooms of a 12-step meeting, we talk about helping the newcomer or the new person to recovery, and we talk about that's the most important person in the room, and we talk about service to the community and the recovery community specifically, but also the broader community. So tell me, walk me through, if you would, walk us through your journey into why you are running for delegate now, and what that means for people like me in the recovery community, but specifically substance use disorder, mental health, all the things, healthcare.
Yeah, so I am one of 7 kids. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, which is an area that's been hit hard by the opioid epidemic as well. And then, so for those who don't know, it's in the Rust Belt, our nice little moniker for places that have been left behind. And I am, so my dad was a union auto worker. My mom was a church secretary. Very much a working class upbringing. By the time I was 18, I was married and had my first child, my daughter. My partner and my husband struggled with addiction. And by the time I was 20, I was on my way to divorce and raising my daughter by myself. So I joined the military at the age of 20. About 4 months later, September 11th happened. So
Oh,
for the first time in my life, really, we were in an active war. So I got out of training, went straight to an air base in Germany, where I worked in a gun shop. I was one of um, probably 5, 6 women on the base that did my job, but in my shop, I was the only woman. And I was building and repairing the weapon systems for A-10s that went downrange. So in Iraq and Afghanistan, all of them came through our gun shop. And then I worked with explosives for about 3 more years. During that time in active duty, I was there for 6 years. I was unfortunate enough to become another statistic, which is I became a military sexual assault survivor. And that resolution was very unsatisfactory because it goes through a command structure in the military. I had seen a number of folks who had survived that turned to self-medication. And most of them would leave, end up getting discharged for that self-medication due to the fact that it was unresolved trauma. It was something that wasn't treated very well. And there was, that temptation. I was lucky enough that I've always had my daughter and I've been her sole caregiver. So when people talk about being a single parent being a difficult barrier, it is in terms of financial and all that good stuff. But it is, and it was for me, a constant motivator to, since I was the only one that she could count on, I always made sure that she could count on me. So I left active duty and became a reservist while going to school. I'm majoring in criminal justice with a resource protection background because I wanted to be a park ranger. I think that this is, you talked about, young Nathan probably went over in the multiverse and it's a very common thing. Everybody that I meet when I was working was like, oh my God, this is the coolest job ever. And it is, it's a great job. I was in Youngstown doing, working 3 jobs and going to school full time. And then got my job, was very excited, came here to Virginia. The Park Service does joke that we pay overtime and sunsets, which is very true. We do not pay well. So I was working for a very low pay rate.
You should come work in recovery support services.
Yeah. So I was able to, but I was able to just barely keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. And I did that for about 4 years before heading to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Academy in Georgia. Now, I had been through 2 police academies. I was Ohio State certified and federally certified as a seasonal ranger, and then had to go through a 3rd academy. And I had, in that time, in the interim, become a crisis intervention trained instructional officer and a disability advocate because for many mental illnesses as well as for autism, the arrest rate is extraordinarily high, as well as the injury rate through police violence. So it was really important to me, having 1 child on the spectrum at that time, that and knowing so many people in the mental health community, to make sure that officers had the best possible training when dealing with those occurrences. One of the things that became really clear to me at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Academy was that was not prioritized. So I started advocating there, explaining, I've been doing this for 4 years. This is my education. This is my background. I do it by myself. I'm not comfortable with this being the teaching that we're giving to 83 federal agencies. They did not like that very much. So so it's a funny thing. Police instructors don't like being corrected. So I ended up one day before graduation being sent home, being told that I needed to have my attitude adjusted. I had completed all the skill sets, but I was told that I could only go back and repeat the entire 5-month academy if I could keep my mouth shut. So I instead decided to continue fighting. So that started, and my son was on the way as I was going through this process. And so I decided instead to keep fighting for, a number of the issues that I had seen at the academy. There was some inherent racial bias being trained in. There was certainly some mental health, like terrible words being used, and language is so important. And I think people don't realize that, whether it was the the community struggling with addiction, communities struggling with mental illness, sex workers, all these really, really these words that were meant to imply inferiority, to create this us versus them mentality, to imply danger, to imply illegality and immorality. And that leads to a mindset that is dangerous for me. So I started out in really working with the disability community and with the police community, trying to help to advocate for that, and went back to advocating for those survivors of sexual violence, as I had been doing during my 5 years in the reserves as the sexual assault resistance counselor. So I had done some peer-to-peer for military sexual assault survivors during my reserve years. So all that just really kind of culminated in 2016 and 2017 that followed. And so it just really kind of pushed out to, okay, we're not getting the relief we need on the advocacy side. We're just not being heard. So it's time to get into the electoral side. And the last 4 years have been knocking for candidates I believe in. I ran back in 2017 just to hopefully get some information to our longstanding legislator who had been unchallenged in over 2 decades. I'm happy to say that even though the district was about a 30-point Republican district then, and I was running as a Democrat, that the next year that incumbent voted for Medicaid expansion, which he had advocated against very strongly. So we moved the needle, but then when the districts were redrawn, a lot of folks reached out and asked me to run again with a district that was winnable. It took a little arm twisting because the political side of it, I love being an advocate. I love being able to yell at people. But really, I do believe it's incredibly important that when we have the opportunity and we come from these communities, and this is a passion and something that belongs to our hearts, that we are able to get out and run, and that we do it, because I don't know that there's a better way to get folks to listen than to be somebody who's actually pulling the lever for those votes.
Yeah, that was a surprise to me as a person in recovery who found my recovery through a jail program. I was arrested as a result of a possession charge, or I was arrested and charged with possession of Schedule I, Schedule II narcotics, which in Virginia, as you may or may not be aware, it risks up to 10 years in prison, which is absurd on the face of it. When you have states like Utah and other states that have made these misdemeanors. And so for me, I had no idea that was that was a case. And of course, in Virginia, you do have the first time disposition, first offender disposition. However, that can get thrown out the window if you have a reoccurrence of use, while you're in pretrial or pick up new charges because you're using. And that's what happened to me. And so as a result, I'm now a felon and had no idea that my voting rights would be taken away, that I would not be able to run for office, serve on a jury, all the things, right? Which I can now do, except for own a gun. I would have to petition the courts to still own to own a gun at this point. But I've gotten my rights restored, and some governors have made it easier than others. This particular governor, recent governor or current governor Northam, he's made it a priority to get people back into voting and back, their civil rights. However, it's ingrained in our state constitution, our Commonwealth Constitution. So, that's a big issue personally for me, as well as bringing possession charges down to a misdemeanor, defelonizing or reclassifying drugs. However, and this is an important point, I think, when we're looking at the totality of drug policy in Virginia, ensuring and how we handle mental health crises. It's like the Marcus alert system that just went through, and other things that are trying to address the health issue instead of addressing it as a police problem. It's the same with drugs in my mind. It's like, okay, great, we do have a problem. There's nobody who, the rest of the United States, the rate of overdoses was 30% last year. We were 41% in Virginia. Our overdose rates went up. So, obviously there is a problem. We're right on that 95, corridor, but addressing it in the courts is not working. And there are people, in the House and in the Senate that are doing, good work right now that are trying to. You get like Sally Hudson in Charlottesville. She's looking at this and saying, how do we declassify this so we can ensure that people, or reclassify this, so that we can ensure that people get the healthcare needs taken care of. And I've talked to a lot of people running for office, and there's a lot of people who come to me and say, well, Nathan, would you have gotten into recovery if you hadn't been arrested? And I think that's a really valid point. A lot of people ask me that. I said, and my response to that is, I don't know. There wasn't another way. So we do need another way, and there wasn't another way offered to me at the time. It turns out there is another way. We've got this system in place where we've got these non-governmental agencies, and we do have DBHDS and the CSBs, which do a lot of great work. I tend to beat up on them a little bit, but I also know a lot of people who work there doing incredible work. And I've got a guy that was just in my office. But we have non-governmental organizations, agencies that are doing this work, like McShin Foundation and like True Recovery, like other organizations like that. We did recently get, a big $10 million push with the ARP funding that came through from the federal government. And that went right to VAR, the Virginia Association of Recovery Residences. How do we ensure that we continue to push that needle forward? How do we continue to ensure that we're working towards solving the addiction crisis, the drug epidemics, as a public health issue instead of a public safety criminal justice concern? And I know I've thrown a lot of words out there, but my question is, what do you say to that? How do we do this? What do you know your thoughts?
So there's a Biden quote that I'm quite fond of, where he says, don't tell me what your priorities are, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what your priorities are. So
I like that.
So there's a and I think that's really where we have to look at where we concentrate our funding. So we put a lot of funding into policing, and when it comes to individuals on the ground being well trained, being well, compensated for their work, making sure that they have health care and benefits, that funding is well spent. When it comes to things like SWAT vehicles and riot gear, and and then we look at things like knowing that certain police agencies utilize quotas for arrest. Those are all things that we need to address in policing and make sure that we are prioritizing well. When we remove incentives like funding based on quotas and funding based on drug interdiction, so we create an environment where getting help becomes the more important thing. We also need to make sure that we provide the resources for law enforcement officers to do that, right? Because I've spent a lot of time with the autism community. I've spent a lot of time with mental health community. I've spent a lot of time in the recovery community. And, some of the communities I belong to represent some of the largest proportion of individuals who struggle with addiction. So veterans, law enforcement, working class individuals, individuals with trauma, they are all higher end on the addiction scale. So, and my family has a history of it. So it's something that I'm very familiar with. And when we look at that, I know personally that someone who is under the influence of specific drugs, and there's certain ones that are more likely to cause it than others, and also someone who is in crisis, or even an individual with autism who is having a meltdown, can be physically dangerous. And the reason is because we don't know how to address it properly most of the time. So making sure that we do actually have the individuals who are trained on call available for law enforcement. So that means investing in things like social workers. That means investing in things like psychiatrists. It means investing in things like mental health care units and making sure that we have beds available to individuals. It means investing in things like hospital response, that instead of just treating an overdose or just treating a trauma, we are also treating, instead of just the medical part of it, we're recognizing that this is going to create a mental health emergency. So we need to address that and make sure those individuals are coming there and providing care and offering those resources right then. And that is all an investment in a system that has been overburdened. So we have to make that investment. It's an investment that is well worth it. It saves us money in the long term. We know that having an addiction crisis is an incredibly expensive thing. But we also know that we can prevent a lot of these comorbidities from even occurring. So poverty is something that leads to higher rates of addiction. So making sure that we are creating environments where fewer people are living in poverty, making sure that we are creating environments where people have access to mental health care so they're not self-medicating, making sure that we have fewer physical and sexual traumas that lead to addiction. So those are some of the things that are really important. Those are long-term investments. We talk about what we want to invest in. These are things that pay off in the long run. We know they do. Things like building up stuff, essentially through contractors, that doesn't pay off in the long run. We don't get money back on that investment. We do on taking care of people. And so if we look at it from a purely economic standpoint, it does save money. I look at it more from a human standpoint, where I know wonderful and amazing people that have overdosed, that have lost their lives to addiction, whether they're still alive or not. And I know that I feel it is my responsibility to help as many people avoid that as possible. And so that is something that, we can invest in as a community. But as a Commonwealth, if we're looking at, well, where's the money come from? There are places where we overspend, and there are places that we can spend more effectively. And we actually make the job better for law enforcement when we don't have them dealing with something they are not trained to deal with. I do think we can look at our classification of drug penalties. We definitely need to bring them down. We need to provide. Now, we have the intervention programs, but they're not a guarantee. Some communities don't have them. So making sure that we are across the board, making sure that first-time offenses have access to quality care, and they can actually do those diversion programs. And then just the standard of justice should not vary based on what county or city you're in. It should be the same across the Commonwealth. And so I think that's really an important part of it. I think that, we do, but it's really, it's an investment in those structures that build long-term recovery, because long-term recovery is the goal. And it can be very difficult to get into the programs, and you have to ask for help. And when you're in the throes of addiction, you're very unlikely to do that. So yes, that police interaction can lead to it, but if we have officers who can call a social worker, then it can lead to it without the arrest, without the felony. And felony enfranchisement is really important. I believe 100% in automatic restoration. I think that my partner is German. He grew up in Hamburg, and when I was talking to him about automatic restoration, he looked at me and he said, "You mean people can't vote from jail?" I said, "No, they can't." I said, "Well, jail, yeah, kind of, but not prison." And so, and that's in the German criminal justice system. You're still a citizen in jail, so you still have citizens' rights, which is crazy, right? But
There are places in the United States where you can vote from prison,
Yeah.
but not in Virginia.
Yeah. So I do believe that there's really a need and again, because the people most impacted by this policy should be the people that have the power to change it and have the input to put into it. So if we're talking about the recovery community and 90% of them have to fight to get their rights restored, they are the ones that have the most effective ideas and programs that they can share because it's their lived experience with the electoral system, and we've banned them from sharing it, so that it doesn't even make sense in the way that our government's supposed to work and how our government works well. So when we're talking about criminal justice reform, the fact that so many of those most impacted by it can't even impact it at the voting booth is really problematic. And we need to make sure that we are valuing that input because it's that lived experience, and lived experience is the greatest teacher on any of these topics. So, this is what I needed. The first time I utilized crisis intervention was with a young woman from Florida, and she was having a psychotic episode. She suffered from schizophrenia, and she arrived at our park unclothed and very, very incoherent. And I was able to talk her into self-committing at the local hospital. And so it was probably about a half an hour interaction. And anyway, I did it in front of my police chief. And he walked away from it and he said, "What was that?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I've never seen that. You were so patient. Like, she was dangerous." I said, "No, she wasn't dangerous. She didn't touch me." And he said, "But you knew what to do." And I said, "That was crisis intervention. You all aren't." And in Ohio, it's required for officers. So I had actually gotten the original training through the Ohio State certification. And he says, "No, we're not." And, her parents came up a couple days later to bring her clothing and to talk with her at the hospital. And they said that she was the best they had seen her in 20 years since her diagnosis, and that every time she had run into law enforcement, she had been arrested. Yeah. And so, the idea that is just a common lived experience, and that's where actually crisis intervention comes from, is the mental health community saying, like, this is what we go through, and we know we're more likely to hurt you, but if you knew how to interact with us, we might not be. So, that and that experience in learning that was like how valuable this was, and that came from that community. And to have her parents tell me that in 20 years she had been had 10 or 12 interactions with police, and she had been arrested every single time. And she was the nicest thing. Once I was able to calm her down and break a little bit through her veil of unreality that she was in at that point. And so I think, this is incredibly important, and it's a tool that all of our officers should have. But if they don't even have the places to send people, if they don't have the social workers to call, and I recognize that law enforcement is not always my mindset. So, some of them are not going to be super skilled at this. That's why social workers should be on call. That's why psychiatrists should be on call. To help with those situations. And we can provide that with a smart investment, and taking the money away from programs where we're not getting anything out of them. Our community isn't getting anything out of it. So I do think, recovery homes are really important, but it's an across the board investment we need to make in this. And looking at individuals who have added to the opioid crisis, and we can have them help pay for it if we write the laws right and prosecute right. So,
let's talk about that opioid abatement authority. But that's another conversation. There's so much that you said there that I'd like to unpack a little bit, though. And one of the crisis intervention, because I know, we had a situation here in Henrico County 2 or 3 years ago, where a woman was having a psychotic episode in her own home, and somebody had called to do a wellness check on her, and the police responded, and she was barricaded in her bedroom, and they broke down the door to get into the bedroom, and she came at them with an axe, and they shot and killed her. And that was so and there's a lot of co-occurring with the substance use disorder. I don't know if that was a situation with this particular case, but that response to me, though, that was really striking to me. There's a couple things that have happened over the last couple of years that have just been standout moments of opportunities through crisis mismanagement, and this poor woman in her own home, and nothing happening really to the police, and I don't know what crisis intervention training is happening. I know it's gotten better in Henrico, and I've talked to Shannon Taylor about that, the Commonwealth's attorney, about that, and I know that they've been implementing more and more. And I think it's really important for us as members of the recovery community and members of the mental health community to continue to tell our stories, to continue to interact and engage the public partners that we have, so that we don't have these crises on our hands again, in using the resources we have available. And I agree, the best resources we have is that authentic lived experience. And you mentioned in that conversation, beginning of the conversation, you mentioned interactions in the hospitals and overdoses. And so this has been a particularly annoying, frustrating issue over the last couple of years. There's been there was an amazing bill, Julie Funkhauser up in Northern Virginia, and she has this incredibly empowering story of what she's done in her own recovery, but through the loss of her partner as a result of being discharged, from an emergency department without proper care. What happened next is that he's no longer here. And so what she's tried to do is change the conversation and to just make it standard in recovery, emergency departments across the Commonwealth to have, initially the bill was, certified peer recovery specialists, which came from the Mental Health Society of Behavioral Health. Make sure that people are introduced to what recovery can be and what it looks like, and just having a standard set of protocols, evidence-based protocols available for a person who comes in and presents, so we're not just treating and treating overdoses, which not every hospital is doing that. There's some really good hospitals doing some great work too, and yet it's not standardized. And we couldn't get that bill through. Like, a very, very watered down bill went through 2 years ago, that simply said, okay, well, the Department of Health has to come up with standards. Well, okay, great. We tried to push through again last year. Well, I guess the beginning of this year, right? With the regular session. And that bill, we couldn't even get Narcan to be distributed out of the emergency department. And this is through a blue House and Senate, and everything blue over here. So which I'll go into how purple is the color of recovery, and how purple is the color that we use, when we talk to, people running and people who are in office, because, I vote many issues, but my life is the most important one. And so because of that, though, we couldn't even get Narcan out of that. And so the best that came out of that was a flyer. Here's some information about what you can do next. And I just think that we're what's the word I'm looking for? We're missing an opportunity, to have and we're missing an opportunity to have peers, with lived experience there. We're missing an opportunity to reduce stigma, to allow people to get access when they need it. And I've been, in a hospital, in my recovery, and had conversations with doctors and nurses and all the clinicians about, hey, wait a second, what are you putting in me? I have, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. And, many have said, oh, wow, great. Thank you for having that conversation. But I've had some looks like, what are you talking about? What does that mean? And so that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And I wasn't even asking for help with my addiction. I was just, I think at one point, it doesn't matter. But anyway, the point is that, we don't have our clinicians properly trained. We're not giving people the access to recovery they need at the moment they need it, and I think of the gap for me. I was arrested with narcotics on me. I was spent the night in jail. I went home, and then I had to go to court for that. Nowhere, and then I went to pretrial. Nowhere in all of my pretrial, nowhere in the arrest situation did anybody say, "Hey, you know what? There's something else you can do." Nobody who had lived experience and knew what I was going through talked to me like a human being one-on-one, without talking down to me, without telling me how awful I am, without telling me why I'm a felon now. Nobody said to me, "You know what? This seems like this might be a problem for you. We can help." I don't know that I would have gotten it. I might not have, right? But I can tell you, towards the end of my pretrial, I sat down with my pretrial officer, who had been, was this lovely woman doing the best she could. But, I always walked in, and I tell this story all the time, so forgive me. But I walked in, and I had, a button down shirt. My hair was short at the time, so I was very clean cut. And I would walk in every time, and I would just tell this, I would look like I was doing great. And the reality is I was 3 or 4 or 5 days from my previous use, because I wanted to make sure that I did well on the, I didn't want to fail at urine screen, but I would get high in the parking lot, And I'm not saying that proudly. I'm telling you, like, I lost 35 pounds in 4 months in front of this woman. And she looked at me at the end when I said, "What are we doing?" And she said, "Well, Nathan, look at how well you're doing." And in my head, I'm screaming, I have stuff in my car. I'm about to get, and at no point did she have any idea what was actually going on with me. And I never saw her. Well, I didn't see her again until I went to trial, because I ended up absconding. And so, I think of those gaps, and this was at a rural community. This is Warrenton. It's pretty rural up there. I think if I'd been arrested in Henrico, I would have had different outcomes. But, you talked about, across the board being, having the same thing that happens in Warrenton, be the same thing that happens in Fauquier County, being the same thing that happens down in somewhere farther south, Virginia Beach. So, I look at that too, and I think there's this push now to putting drug courts in place. And I think this is a really dangerous idea. And I bring this up. I don't know if Robert's watching, but I've got one of our strong watchers or viewers who is constantly talking about drug courts, and this is something that was completely new to me. And so, it wasn't something that was offered to me. I'm grateful it wasn't offered to me, but it's like now we have these drug courts, which I think 5.5 million Virginians have access to. And I don't think on the face of it, it's the worst idea. But I do think that it's just being promoted without evidence, and brought to. So I think that, conversations I'm having now with public policy makers are, well, wait a second, what are we doing? What is this? What is drug court? What does it mean to you? Are we actually doing the best thing for our people? And I can tell you, like, 200 and some odd people graduated from drug court last year. The numbers are not good. The numbers are not good, and they'll be finessed to look great. But the thing is that they create more barriers to recovery. They create barriers to successful outcomes. That financial work. All these things, and they create barriers. When you become a felon, you lose your driver's license. For 6 months. And then, in many communities, well, now you got to go to drug court, but, oh, by the way, we're not on a bus route. We don't have public transportation. You got to figure it out. And we're going to call you at any time, just out of the blue. Maybe you're going to have to miss work. So a good somebody keeps telling me like a good start would just be to call this recovery court. I'm like, well, that's great. You can call whatever you want, but it's still what it is. It's a not evidence-based, horrible set of construct that's not working well. Or we can look at the alternatives. Let's get rid of the felony, the felony possession charges. Let's look at that and say, we can look at what they did in Oregon, right? In Oregon, it's not working great yet, but they're working through it. I think we can learn from that. They took a Portugal model, they changed it a little bit. I think what they did was by not mandating You are familiar with what they did in Oregon? Yeah, so they decriminalized all drugs, right? And in the process, you could pay a $100 fine or you can get assessed for needs, right? But they didn't mandate the assessment. And I think that's crucial because we had a guest on a couple months ago. It was maybe 4 months in to Oregon. I don't know what's happened since then, but 4 months in, and everybody who'd been arrested had just paid the fine. So nobody was getting assessed. And I think that's, there's a crucial point here that I think we also need to recognize too is not everybody who's possessing drugs is an addict who needs help, who needs all the continuum of care, the wraparound services. But I do think that we need to have access to that. So what do? Mandating the assessment, making sure that we're looking at that, well, wait a second. What is going on with you? Is this something you want to work on? Is this something you're not, and I think having the peers in place that, instead of having a drug court run by judges and officers, we have some sort of recovery assessment run by peers, and clinicians too. There's a partnership there. And I think these are good models to look at and observe as we go forward. So I know I've said a lot. I don't really have a question out of that, but what do you support in terms of, because you come from a criminal justice background, coming from a policing background, what do you support as far as treating this addiction crisis? Because there's also, a huge part of this, sorry, I keep talking and thank you, Justin. He keeps muting you and not, there's a huge part of the people that are in jail now, right? And I'll tell you a story about that in a second. But there's a whole bunch of people in jail right now with a substance use disorder. Some places in Virginia it's up to 90%, but the estimates are 70-ish% right now of individuals who have some sort of, maybe not substance use disorder, but have some sort of chemical dependency that causing all the other crime associated with it. And yes, tackling all the underlying issues, the job security, excuse me, the unemployment, all the social service issues. What do we do though? What do we do for those who are committing crimes at the same time, in service of their substance use disorder, in service of the addiction? How do we help those individuals? And that's another piece of that. So you can go ahead and unmute. I'm sorry. Thanks. I got distracted there for a second. Katie, what do you say to that?
Well, I think that we know that we have a mental health issue in our jails and prisons. Whether it's substance use disorder or anxiety or depression or, we know that is an issue. We know that is as many as 50 to 60% of our inmates and incarcerated persons are, in fact, have a mental disorder. And that treatment, I think, in general, we need better treatment programs in prisons and jails. So we do have, if it's just a possession charge, or then that's the reclassification of the substances. That is looking at our drug laws and working on those issues. So that's like a legislative thing. Now, if we're looking at the crime that arises from it, theft and burglary arising from a need to pay for your substance use, those kind of things, then we are looking at something that we have a separate crime. So we need to look at how we need to identify that is rising out of. So our pretrial report should include that there's a substance use disorder here that has led to this other criminality. And we need to make sure that while that sentence is being served, that we are providing those services. Now, I know we have NA in our jails and prisons, but we don't always have, very comprehensive services. We don't also make sure that's part of probation and parole when we get out. So making sure that we are looking at continued care, because sometimes incarceration is the easiest time to get clean, and sometimes it's one of the hardest. It kind of just depends on which institution you're in. I have a beloved aunt that got clean in jail. And so she's like, if I hadn't been locked up for 8 months, without access to drugs, I would have never gotten clean. So, but I also have, a beloved friend who OD'd in a jail cell. So, it kind of depends. So, while those services are there, but when you get back out into the community, that's where substance use disorder becomes the hardest to maintain, right? Especially if you have your friends, some of them are still using, or you just, people know you, and that's the community that you spend time with. And that is very common with substance use disorder, is that you build a community around it, right? So you kind of isolate all those loved ones from before, and it becomes your community. And so that can be very difficult after you get back out. And a lot of times, if you have served time, families might be, fed up at that point, and they give up on. And so for certain people, it's incredibly isolating. Now they've lost their family, they're clean. So the community of users that they've created is pretty much their only group anymore. So they go back to their friends, and their friends are happy that they're clean, but at the same time they use, and it's tempting. And so we have to make sure that continuity of care continues. And so I think that's one of the big things. We see this again and again in the numbers and recidivism. So that comes, that criminal justice background comes in handy in the education part of it. Not so much the execution and the police academies, but the college courses, where we see how recidivism is best served. So, and comprehensive mental health care during incarceration is one of the number one ways that we serve it. The other way is through that continuity of care afterwards. So probation and parole are meant to stop the criminality, right? They're meant to monitor the criminality and the recidivism. They're not meant to treat the human being. So that continuity of care that best serves is regular meetings with clinicians, regular meetings with a peer recovery group, whatever that might be. For some it's NA, for some it's just group therapy, can be a recovery house like McShin, or so. But those communities with the recovery community, individuals who are in recovery like themselves, and also making sure that we are treating some of those predeterminants. So things like poverty, if they, we're living in a community where drug use is common and where poverty is high, then making sure that we are providing the opportunity to stay employed. So we've given them better employment options. We are creating employment opportunities instead of things like banning them from certain employment by, having a box that says that they are felons. And so we, creating those really good economic opportunities as well needs to be part. So reentry is really important. But also we know that continuing that care, that medical care, the mental health care, the community care that builds up people when they leave incarceration. So that's, I think, really the important part of that treatment. I do think, yes, we have a number of folks who already have substance use disorder. I know I come from the chronic pain community. I spent my life with lymphoma, so I have severe joint and spinal issues, and I'm in a large amount of pain every day. I am lucky enough to be a veteran, so I have dog tags, and mine very clearly say no narcotics. I have a red dog tag that I wear that says no narcotics, because I'm just well aware of my my genetic history of it, and I'm well aware of how many people in the chronic pain community end up using because they needed something to relieve the pain, and after their doctor cut them off from the prescription medication, they ended up finding another way to do it. And I just was aware of those statistics because I'm educated in criminal justice, so I made sure I didn't allow myself to even get that gateway in. And it's hard, though. It's difficult. And I know that if I was aware of the relief, I don't know what the relief feels like because I've never allowed myself it, that, after a few months, this pain would wear on me, and if I had used previously, I might very well go back to it. So things like treating the healthcare issues that lead to it, comprehensive pain management that offers alternatives. I'm a yoga fanatic because I think that it helps with mind and body. So I actually teach pain management through exercise, and I think that having those kind of resources available to everyone is a really important thing. There's so many people that need the help, but they're not going to seek it. And that is a common thread with all of these identities, whether it is a previous trauma. People with trauma don't seek help because they don't trust others. People with mental illness don't seek help because frequently they believe that other people are going to hurt them. And they're incredibly vigilant because they're more likely to be abused and disabused. So, people from lower economic backgrounds just can't afford help, so they don't seek it. So, I mean, this is something that, and then once we add the criminalization factor, then individuals are afraid to seek help because they're afraid they'll end up in jail because of it. And too often we are turned away. We also have stories of people who go and say, I need help. I'm thinking of self-harm, or I'm thinking of using again, or I'm in a lot of pain. And once you have that history of substance use disorder, then you become even more likely to be turned away. Oh, you're medication seeking. We're not going to see you. Oh, you don't really need help. This is not what we do. This is an emergency room. We treat medical emergencies. So making sure that that is considered a medical emergency, that mental health care is considered a medical emergency, and that our ERs and to our, again, ERs and hospitals credits, they are so overwhelmed right now. Making sure they have the resources to actually do that. We know that our beds are full in our mental health facilities. But being able to provide those options, I think, is really important. And that if we are prosecuting for a drug-related crime, and understanding that a lot of times, in particular, the property crimes, theft and burglary, are
That is a tough word.
are drug-related crimes. So and recognizing them as such, and so making sure that when we are prosecuting for those things, that we are providing that, the assessment of needs, and whatever those needs are for that individual, that they get them not only while incarcerated, but afterwards as well. Because that community reentry is really difficult. And if you're throwing in substance use disorder, it's even harder. So we need to make sure that we're providing that with our, we have plenty of money for probation officers that are going to make sure that you're not using again by making pee in a cup, and making sure that, but we don't have we don't seem to put the resources into making sure that that is practical for you. It is something you can achieve, and that after your probation and your parole, you will continue to do so because you found value in it, and you have found value in yourself. And so that, you can do this. And so, starting the immediate, first step out, of that institution is so important. And I know institutionalized. I've spent most of my life one way or another. It's the military, but it's scary. That first step is scary when you have had everything around you, and the longer the term of incarceration is, the longer the more terrifying that is. So making sure that we're eliminating that pitfall. We put people out on the edge of a cliff, and we're like, don't fall in. But because we'll arrest you again if you do. But instead of saying, okay, let's put you out in front of a bridge, and we'll help you cross it.
I like that. Justin, there's a comment up there. Do you want to pull that up so we can see? Is it something? Greg Lewis says, I have a friend now who will not seek treatment because of a warrant. Yeah, that's a really common thing. And Greg, I feel you on that, because I've had 2 warrants in the past, and would not seek anything until, and that is a problem, and that continues to be a problem. And one of the things, I realize we're coming up on the end of the hour here, but I don't want to go down this path. It's a long conversation, but I really, you know what? I think though that there's a lot of good conversation that we've just had here, and there's a lot more to continue to have. And I like that we're able to incorporate, here, Justin, with the podcast here, we're able to talk to individuals who are running for office, Republican, Democrat, Independent, who are looking to make some real change with the way that we look at substance use disorder. And I'm part of the Virginia Recovery Advocacy Project, and so one of the things that we continue to say is, and I think what you're getting at, Katie, is that when we invest in recovery, we build stronger families. We create safer communities, and we produce healthier citizens. And the reality is that we can invest money in recovery on the front end and save a lot of money on courts and judges and jails and on the back end. And by doing that, and by changing the conversation, by reducing the stigma, by giving people access to immediate recovery support services. And Step Virginia does a really good job at setting out, Step Virginia, which does mental health. Katie, you're probably aware of that. But Step Virginia does a really good job at saying we're going to provide same-day access. They're not the best at actually providing same-day access. They'll provide same-day assessment. And I think, though, look, we're looking into it, man. I love that this is the conversation. We can continue to move that needle forward. I'm going to keep using that phrase. You used it earlier. Keep pushing the needle forward, because there's a real opportunity to change things here. And so, Katie, before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to say something, to finish out. But I also want to tell you that our biggest audience is, and I don't know if I told you this or not, but our biggest audience are actually individuals who are currently experiencing incarceration. We give these video podcasts to Paytel, who distribute them for free to individuals who have access to tablets within, I don't know if it's across the country or if it's just in Virginia, but there are 48 different institutions who have access to this. And hundreds of thousands of individuals, hundreds of thousands of views come from this. And so I think that, as we are changing the conversation to say, hey, wait a second, there's another way that we can do this. I think that we're also empowering. My hope is that we're empowering individuals who are sitting in a cell right now, like I was once upon a time, and saying, look, there is hope for something different. There's something else you can do. And not only that, but there are people listening who want to change the conversation, who want to help. So, Katie, as we're nearing the hour here, I want to give you an opportunity to close out and say anything you want to say to finish us off. And I also want to thank you again for joining us today and for your incredible patience with me over the last couple of weeks as we've sort of been navigating the world, life on life's terms, we say in recovery, right? So thank you. And thank you for coming, for joining us, and Justin, for all the wonderful work that you do. Any last thoughts?
Sure. So I do want to say to Greg, have your friend check. I can't tell you how many times that I've run a warrant and that the people didn't want them anymore. A lot of times they're not even, they've been expired and people don't even know that the warrant's been expired. So as former law enforcement, I'll tell you, just have them check it. And then maybe get help. So I would just say, I have to do this, right? I'm Katie Sponsler, and I'm running the Democratic nominee for the 66th district in Virginia's House of Delegates. So if you're able to, please vote. So I have to tell you that, but I'm just going to say to your audience in particular, recovery is tough. Trauma is tough. Mental health is tough. And we make it tougher by not treating it the way it deserves to be treated, which is as a medical need, a disability. And if we remove the stigma and we acknowledge it, it's a huge part of my campaign to be able to say, listen, I am a sexual assault survivor. I am a PTSD and anxiety sufferer. I have my diagnoses and I'm not ashamed of them. They make me the person I am. And that when I need help, I ask for it. And it's an incredibly important part of being able to survive and build the way I am. And to raise my kids. So if you need help, ask for it. I am always available on my website. You click the little contact us, you get me. So even if it's a personal need or something that I can help with, that's not a law, please reach out, let us know. To those incarcerated individuals, I know so many folks that have been able to beat that and become the human beings they were meant to be after they were released. But in the meantime, the system is really hard and makes it harder for you. So we're going to work really hard to make sure that it is not that difficult, because one mistake should not define a life.
Amen to that. And I want to piggyback on what you said to Greg. Your friend needs to get some help. And, a lot of organizations, if you go to, recovery community organizations, if you go to a treatment center, they can, explain where you are and what it is that's going on. We've found we found that we've been able to communicate with prosecutors and say, well, we have a participant with us, and so we're going to see if recovery works first. And sometimes we've been able to work with prosecutors, or the Commonwealth's attorneys, and to see, to work things out a little, to create better outcomes. The reality, though, is that, if you're going to serve the time, though, if you have to go back to court, if to have an advocate, a recovery advocate with you going in can sometimes really at least help, demonstrate your willingness to try something different. So, Greg, treat the healthcare issue, regardless of what else is going on, because I know too many people who didn't want to get help who are no longer around. So anyway, on that somber note, thank you, Katie, for being here with us, and good luck to you in the 66th. We appreciate you for coming and lending your voice. Again, Justin, thank you very much. And to everybody watching and listening, tomorrow we have Jimmy Brooks. Jimmy Brooks is running in the 74th. Oh, gosh, I forgot my little notes. My bad. But I'll tell you what, Jimmy Brooks is a former board chair of the McShin Foundation, running for House of Delegates on the Republican as a Republican in the 74th district. And I'll tell you what, Jimmy's going to be on fire tomorrow, making us laugh. I know that. So with that, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, guys.
Here at McShin, we believe in the McShin way, which is authentic recovery support service providers, people with lived experience, bringing that experience to those who need that lived experience in recovery.
Here at McShin, we believe in many things to support our mission. We believe in women empowerment.
What I love most about what we believe here at McShin is we believe in the authenticity of the peer-to-peer approach.
Here at the McShin Foundation, we believe in giving people opportunity.
Here at McShin, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
At the McShin Foundation, we believe in helping people reach their full potential.
Here at the McShin Foundation, we believe in multiple pathways to recovery.
Here at McShin, we believe in placing principles before personalities to help spread hope.
Here at McShin, we believe that recovery is possible and that any person seeking recovery can become a more acceptable, responsible, and productive member of society.
Here at the McShin Foundation, we believe in self-discovery.
Here at McShin, we believe in saving lives and offering second chances.
Here at McShin, we believe you can do this.
Here at McShin Foundation, we believe that we can only keep what we have by giving away, which is why we continue to help others like us seek and find recovery.
Any place, we'll get there.